In the summer of 1995, in a dusty market town in northern Nigeria, a school teacher stood watching good food die. Tomatoes that came in fresh on Monday were soft by Wednesday and rotten by Friday. Eggplants, peppers, greens, all of it racing the sun and losing. There was no electricity for miles, no refrigeration, no ice. Families sold what they could in 2 desperate days and threw the rest away. So that school teacher did something nobody expected. He reached back past the power lines, past the machines, all the way back to a piece of knowledge his people had carried in their hands for thousands of years. He took 2 plain clay pots, one smaller and one larger. He set the small one inside the big one. He packed wet sand in the gap between them, and he laid a damp cloth over the top. And the food that died in 3 days started lasting 3 weeks. No cord, no motor, no ice, no bill. Just clay, sand, water, and wind, doing quietly what we pay a humming machine to do every hour of our lives. My name is Pastor Eli, and today I'm going to show you how to build that same cooler on your own back porch for about $5 in less than an hour of unhurried work. I'll show you the simple science of why it works, because once you see it, you'll understand it in your bones. I'll show you what to keep in it and exactly how cold you can expect it to get, with no exaggeration, because there are folks online promising miracles from this thing, and I won't be one of them. It is a wonderful tool. It is not a magic trick. You'll get the truthful shape of it from me, as always. But before any of that, I have to warn you about one thing. There is a single detail right on the surface of the pot itself that decides whether you build a working cooler or an expensive flower planter. Most folks who try this and fail right there at the garden center before they ever get home. It has nothing to do with the size of the pot or the price of the pot. I'll show you exactly what to look for, and I'll give you a 10-second test you can do right in the store aisle. Stay with me for that because it's the whole ball game. Now let me tell you what put this video in my heart, because it didn't start in Nigeria. It started about 40 minutes down the road from my house. Last autumn I drove out to an estate sale at an old farm. The family had passed on, the land was being sold, and the front yard was covered with the contents of a long life. Tools, furniture, canning jars by the crate. And behind the farmhouse, half swallowed by honeysuckle, there stood a little stone building about the size of a garden shed, with a heavy wooden door and a trickle of water running through a channel cut right into the floor. A spring house. If you're past a certain age and you grew up in the country, you just felt something, didn't you? For those who've never seen one, a spring house was a small stone or brick building raised over a natural spring. Cold water came up out of the ground around 55 degrees, summer and winter, and ran through that channel in the floor. And the women of the house set their crocks down into that running water. Milk, butter, cream, eggs. On the hottest afternoon in August, when the fields shimmered and the dogs wouldn't move off the porch, the butter in that spring house stayed firm enough to slice. The milk stayed sweet. A whole farm's worth of food kept cold every day of the year by nothing but stone, shade, and the cold heart of the earth. There was an older sister in our congregation who grew up on a farm like that. And when I described the place to her, her face changed. She said the spring house was her job as a girl, carrying the milk down in the morning, fetching the butter before supper. She said, and I wrote this down when I got home, the cold was just there, like the well water in the shade trees. Nobody paid for it. Nobody thought to. Nobody paid for it. Hold on to that sentence, friend, because we're coming back to it before we're done. Now, you and I probably don't have a spring rising up out of the ground behind the house, but the school teacher in Nigeria didn't either. The desert peoples who first fired clay pots 5,000 years ago didn't either. What they all understood, springhouse builders and desert potters alike, was one piece of quiet physics. And here it is, plain as I can make it. When water dries, it steals heat. That's the whole secret. Let me prove it to you with your own body. Think about stepping out of a swimming pool on a breezy day. The air is 90 degrees, but you shiver. Why would a man shiver in 90-degree air? Because the water on your skin is evaporating. And water cannot evaporate without taking heat with it. Every drop that lifts off your skin carries a little of your warmth away into the air. That's why the Lord built you to sweat. Sweat is your body making itself into a clay pot cooler. The water comes out, the water dries, and the drying pulls the heat off of you. Some of you walked along with me a few videos back when we harvested water out of the night air with a tilted sheet in a mason jar. That morning dew happens when water vapor gives up its heat and turns back into liquid. Today we're running the same quiet machinery in the other direction. Liquid water turning into vapor and pulling heat along with it as it goes. The dew gives water and releases warmth. The clay pot spends water and buys cold. Same coin, friend, two sides. Now here's where the clay comes in and why it has to be clay and nothing else. A plain terracotta pot, the cheap reddish-orange kind sitting in stacks at every garden center in this country, is not solid the way a glass jar is solid. Fired clay is full of pores, thousands upon thousands of tiny passages, far too small to see. When you wet that clay, water creeps into every one of those passages and slowly seeps toward the outside surface. And there, on the outside of the pot, the breeze finds it, and it evaporates. Hour after hour, all day long, a thin, invisible sheen of water is drying off the skin of that pot, and every bit of it is stealing heat as it goes. Steal heat from the pot, and the pot steals heat from whatever sits inside it. Put a smaller pot inside a bigger one. Fill the gap with wet sand so there's a whole reservoir of water feeding that evaporation, and you've built an engine. A silent engine with no moving parts that runs on nothing but water and moving air, and pumps heat out of your food from sunup to sundown. In dry summer weather, the inside of a well-built pot cooler will sit 15, 20, even 30 degrees cooler than the air around it. If it's 95 on the porch, you can be holding the low 70s, sometimes the 60s, inside that inner pot. That is the difference between lettuce that wilts by supper and lettuce that's crisp on Thursday. The desert never needed a power plant, it needed a potter. So let's build one. Here is your shopping list, and it is short. 2 unglazed terracotta pots, one small enough to nest inside the other, with about an inch or two of gap all the way around. Something like a 16-inch pot and a 12-inch pot does fine for a family. A bag of plain, coarse sand, the kind sold for sandboxes or paving. A cork or a lump of beeswax to plug the drainage holes, and a cotton cloth or a piece of burlap big enough to cover the top. If you shop careful, the pots are $2 or $3 a piece, and you likely have the rest around the house already. Call it $5, maybe $7 if you go big. But before you put a single pot in your cart, here comes the warning I promised you. Listen close, because this is where the whole project lives or dies. The pots must be unglazed, raw, plain, bare clay, nothing shiny, nothing painted, nothing sealed. Walk down that garden center aisle and you'll see 2 kinds of pots sitting side by side. The plain terracotta, dusty and matte and orange-brown, the cheapest thing on the shelf. And right beside them, the pretty ones. Glazed pots, glossy blue and green and cream, smooth as a dinner plate, twice the price. And every instinct in you says the prettier pot is the better pot. Not this time. That glaze is glass. They fire a coating of liquid glass right onto the clay, and it seals every last pore shut. A glazed pot cannot drink. A glazed pot cannot sweat, and a pot that cannot sweat cannot cool, any more than a man wrapped head to toe in plastic could cool himself on a July afternoon. Build this project with glazed pots and you will have a heavy, pretty, useless ornament. And you'll tell your neighbors the old trick doesn't work. The trick was fine, the pot was wrong. And some pots will fool you. Some look dull but carry a clear sealer you can barely see. So here is your 10-second test right there in the store. Pour a splash of water on the side of the pot. Bare, honest clay drinks it in almost while you watch, and the spot turns dark, the way a sidewalk darkens in the first minute of rain. Sealed clay sheds it. The water beads up and rolls off, and the pot stays the same color. Dark spot, good pot. Rolling beads, leave it on the shelf. Teach that test to your grandchildren while you're at it. It's the kind of small knowing that used to get handed down with the family Bible. All right, you're home with 2 honest pots. Here's the build, start to finish. First, plug the drainage holes in the bottom of both pots. A cork, a lump of beeswax, a wad of plumber's putty, any of them will do. You want the bottom watertight so your sand stays wet instead of draining out onto the porch. Second, pour an inch or 2 of sand into the bottom of the big pot. This is the bed the inner pot sits on, so the 2 rims come up close to level with each other. Third, set the small pot down inside, centered, and fill the gap between the 2 walls with sand. Take your time and work it down even all the way around. That ring of sand is the water tank of your cooler. Fourth, pour cool water slowly into the sand. It will drink more than you expect. Keep adding until the sand is thoroughly soaked and glistening, wet as the beach where the waves just pulled back, but not standing in a puddle. Soaked, not flooded. And friend, mind that you keep it that way, damp and not swampy, because a pot of standing water on the porch in summer is an invitation to mosquitoes, and we'll be having words about mosquitoes very soon on this channel. Fifth, wipe the inside of the inner pot clean and dry, set your food down in it, and lay a damp cotton cloth over the whole top. The cloth is the lid, and it's a working part of the machine. It evaporates too, pulling heat out through the top, while the clay pulls it out through the sides. That's the entire build. No tools beyond your 2 hands. Maybe 40 minutes the first time, counting the lemonade break. Now, where you set it matters as much as how you build it, and here most folks guess wrong. Instinct says put it in the sun, where it's hot, where the cooling is needed. No. The sun pours heat into that pot faster than evaporation can pull it out. You want shade and you want breeze. A shaded corner of the porch where the air moves. Under the eave on the north side. Beside the open barn door. Shade keeps the heat out and moving air carries the dampness away. And the faster that water evaporates, the colder your pot runs. Shade and wind. Write it on the cloth if you have to. Then there's just one chore, and it's a small one. Morning and evening, pour a little cool water over the sand and re-wet the cloth. 10 seconds with the watering can while your coffee brews. The old folks tied chores like that to the rhythms they already had. Water the pot when you water the hens. Wet the cloth when you bring in the mail. A habit costs nothing once it's a habit. I built mine on a Saturday in late May, 2 pots from the feed store, and I'll tell you the moment it had me. The second morning, I lifted the cloth to fetch the butter, and the air that came up out of that pot touched my face. Cool air, cellar air, rising up out of 2 cheap pots on my own back porch on a morning that was already pushing 80. I stood there with my hand resting on the rim, and the clay itself was cold, friend. Cold like a stone pulled out of a creek. Nothing in this world had been plugged in. I confess I laughed out loud, alone on the porch, like a fool. It felt less like a project and more like being let in on something. So what do you keep in it? Here's the honest inventory. Vegetables and fruits are where this cooler earns its keep, and earns it richly. Tomatoes that go soft on the counter in 3 or 4 days will hold a couple of weeks and more in the pot. Leafy greens that wilt in a single hot afternoon stay crisp for a week and better. Cucumbers, squash, peppers, carrots, beets, cabbage, all of them last weeks instead of days. That school teacher's eggplants went from 3 days to nearly a month, and that one change rewrote the economics of a whole market town. Garden folks, hear me especially. That heartbreaking week in August when the garden gives more than the kitchen can swallow, this pot is your holding pen. It buys you the time to can and dry and ferment at a human pace, the very crafts we walked through together last visit, instead of racing the rot. Butter does beautifully, firm and sweet, a spring house reborn in miniature. Eggs keep well in the cool. A jug of drinking water turns cellar cold and tastes like a different beverage entirely. Leftovers in a covered dish hold safely from dinner to the next day, the way they did in grandmother's icebox. And now the limits, because you know by now I won't dress this up. This is not a freezer. It will never make ice, and it will never get truly refrigerator cold in the heat of the day. So raw meat and fresh milk in a summer heat wave are not jobs for the clay pot. Milk for the day, yes, the way the spring house held it. Raw chicken till Thursday, no. The modern refrigerator earns its keep on meat and milk, and I'd be lying to say otherwise. This pot is for everything else, and everything else is most of what spoils in an American kitchen. The second limit is the big one, and it's the one the enthusiastic videos skip right past. Humidity. This cooler runs on evaporation, and evaporation runs on dry air. Dry air is thirsty air, and thirsty air gulps the water off your pot and carries heat away with every swallow. But muggy air is air that's already full, and full air drinks slow. So if you live in the dry country, the high plains, the desert southwest, the inland west, this pot will flat out astonish you. 30-degree drops, food cold to the touch. If you live where summer feels like a wet blanket, along the Gulf, the deep south in August, the humid bottomlands, the pot still works, but gently. 10 degrees, maybe 15 on a breezy day. That's still the difference between greens lasting 1 day and lasting 4. But it's not the miracle the dry country gets. And you deserve to know that before you build, not after. Want to know what your own air will do before you spend a nickel? Look at the laundry. If a towel on the line is bone dry in an hour, your pot will run cold and strong. If that towel hangs heavy half the day, expect the gentler version. The Lord gave every place its own weather, and an honest workman reads the conditions before he promises the result. If you've been finding these old ways worth your time, do an old preacher a kindness and tap that subscribe button. Every week we pull another piece of forgotten wisdom up out of the attic, and I'd hate for you to miss what's coming. There's one more trick to hand you, and it comes straight from the dry corners of the world where this craft never died. If the evening is hot and the pot's been working hard all day, refresh it just before dark. Pour fresh, cool water through the sand, soak the cloth, and let the night shift begin. Night air is cooler and drier, evaporation runs strong in it, and the pot banks cold all night long, so your food starts the next scorcher already chilled, the way a wise man starts a hard day with a full night's rest. The desert traders did exactly this beside their tents. Cold, stored up like grain. Now, friends, set the build aside for a moment because there's a deeper thing here, and it's the real reason I made this video. Open your power bill this month and find the refrigerator in it. You won't see it listed, but it's in there every month of every year, because that machine in your kitchen never sleeps. It hums at midnight. It hums on Christmas morning. It hums while you're away at your sister's for a week and the house stands empty. It's commonly the single hungriest appliance in the home, and many a household runs a second one out in the garage to keep the overflow cold, humming its own little little hymn to the power company around the clock. Cold in our day is a subscription. We rent it by the kilowatt, every hour of our lives. And we have rented it for so long that we've forgotten it was ever anything else. I won't stand here and tell you somebody plotted to take the spring houses away. Nobody plotted anything. The electric came down the road and it was a genuine wonder, and the spring house door swung shut one ordinary afternoon and simply never got opened again. No villain, just a forgetting. But understand what got forgotten. It wasn't only a stone building over a creek. It was the knowing that cold could be made by an ordinary family out of what the good Lord already provided. Water, wind, clay, shade. The same forgetting we've met before on this channel, in the laundry soap and the bug powder and the morning dew. The world quietly teaches us to rent what our great-grandparents knew how to make, and then it teaches us to smile at the old ways as quaint. Scripture talks about cold more than you might think, and always as a treasure. As cold waters to a thirsty soul, says the book of Proverbs, so is good news from a far country. The writer reached for the most precious comfort his listeners knew, and in a hot, dry land with no machines, that was cold water. And the Lord himself said that whoever gives one of these little ones even a cup of cold water in his name will surely not lose his reward. Not just water, cold water. In that world, cold water meant someone had worked for it. A deep well, a clay jar sweating in the shade, a household that planned ahead. Cold was provision with effort folded into it, which is to say, cold was love made practical. When the Lord chose his picture of simple kindness, he chose the very thing your 2 clay pots will be making on the back porch by this weekend. The old folks didn't leave most of us land or money. What they handed down was sturdier than either. The quiet certainty that an ordinary household with ordinary hands could provide for itself out of creation's own pantry, and owe no man a monthly payment for the privilege. Every spring house, every clay jar, every crock of butter and cold running water was that certainty made solid. We are not the first generation to need cold, friend. We're just the first to believe it only comes from a plug in the wall. So here is your errand for the week, and it's a pleasant one. Drive to the garden center or the feed store. Walk past the glossy, glazed pots, beautiful and sealed and wrong, and pick up 2 plain terracotta pots, one nesting inside the other with a finger's width of room around. Do the splash test right there in the aisle and watch the clay drink. Grab a bag of sand if you need one. Go home, plug the holes, bed the small pot in the big one, pack the gap, soak it slow, lay the damp cloth over, and set the whole thing in shade where the breeze walks through. Then put a thermometer inside, give it an afternoon, and go look. And then come tell me down in the comments. Tell me what your thermometer said, outside air against inside the pot. And tell me what part of the country you're in, because 1,000 of us comparing dry country numbers and muggy country numbers will teach this audience more than any laboratory could. And tell me this too. Did your family have a spring house or an ice box or a cellar where the milk went down on a rope? Somebody reading this remembers carrying the butter, and the rest of us would dearly love to hear about it. I read every one of these. Next time, we turn to the war every porch in America is fighting right about now. I'm going to show you the old preacher's way to clear every mosquito out of your yard for about $5. Without one drop of poison, completely safe for the honeybees, the birds, your grandchildren, and the dog. The exterminator charges $300 a season for what a bucket and a little knowledge will do better. That's next, and summer won't wait, so subscribe and walk along with me. Until then, look well to what you've been given, waste nothing, and God bless.